Sarah Martinez walked through the heavy glass doors of the Mountain View shooting range on a bright Saturday morning in early September. The sun was already hot even though it was only 9 o'clock. She wore a light blue sundress with small white flowers printed all over it. The dress moved gently as she walked. Her shoes were simple white sneakers that looked very clean and new. She carried a brown leather bag over her shoulder that looked old and worn. The bag had scratches and marks from years of use. Sarah was a small woman who stood only 5 feet tall. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked nervous as she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The shooting range was busy that morning. The sound of gunfire echoed from behind the thick walls. The smell of gun oil and burnt powder filled the air. Men in tactical vests and camouflage pants stood around talking. Some were cleaning their guns at the benches. Others were looking at targets they had just finished shooting. When Sarah walked in, everyone seemed to notice her at once. The conversations got quieter. People looked at her and then looked at each other. Some people smiled, but not in a friendly way. It was the kind of smile that said they thought something funny was about to happen. Sarah walked up to the front counter. Her hands held the strap of her bag tightly. Behind the counter stood a large man with a thick beard. His arms were covered in tattoos. Some of the tattoos were military symbols. Others were just designs. His name tag said his name was Robert, but everyone called him Rob. He looked at Sarah and raised his eyebrows. He asked her if she needed help finding something. His voice was not mean, but it was not exactly friendly either. Sarah spoke quietly and said she wanted to rent Lane 7. Rob looked surprised. He asked if she had ever been to a shooting range before. Sarah just nodded yes. She did not say anything else. Rob pushed a clipboard across the counter. On it was a waiver that everyone had to sign. The waiver said that shooting guns could be dangerous. It said that people had to follow all the safety rules. It said the range was not responsible if someone got hurt. Sarah picked up the pen that was attached to the clipboard with a small chain. Her hand shook just a little bit as she signed her name. While she was signing, several men walked past behind her. One of them said something to his friend. He did not say it very loud, but he said it loud enough for Sarah to hear. He said that the range must be having a special day for tourists. His friend laughed. Sarah kept writing. She did not turn around. She did not say anything. After Sarah finished signing the paper, Rob gave her safety glasses and ear protection. The safety glasses were too big for her small face. They kept sliding down her nose. She pushed them back up. Rob pointed toward the range door and told her that Lane 7 was at the far end. He reminded her to keep her gun pointed downrange at all times. He told her not to turn around while she was holding her gun. He said these things like he was talking to a child who might not understand. Sarah thanked him quietly and walked toward the range door. The range was long and narrow. There were 12 lanes separated by walls. Each lane had a target holder that could move forward and back on a track. The targets were paper with black circles printed on them. The center circle was the bullseye. Hitting the center gave the most points. The noise was much louder inside the range even with ear protection. Sarah walked past the other shooters to get to Lane 7 at the end. As she walked, people stopped shooting to watch her. She could feel their eyes on her back. In Lane 5, 2 men were shooting expensive-looking pistols. One man had blonde hair cut very short. He wore wraparound shooting glasses that probably cost more than $100. His gun belt had a custom holster that fit his pistol perfectly. His name was Derek, and he seemed to love being the center of attention. The other man had dark hair and a thick build. His name was Brad, and he usually let Derek do most of the talking. Both men watched as Sarah set her bag down on the bench in Lane 7. Derek said something to Brad, and they both laughed. Sarah opened her gun case slowly. The case was old, and the foam inside was compressed flat in some spots. She took out her pistol carefully. It was a basic 9mm handgun. Nothing fancy. Nothing expensive. The gun showed signs of being used many times. The black finish was worn off in places, showing silver metal underneath. The grip had smooth spots where hands had held it thousands of times. Sarah handled the gun like it was an old friend. She checked it carefully to make sure it was empty. Then she set it down on the bench, pointing downrange, just like the rules said. Derek in Lane 5 was now shooting fast. Bung, 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 bung. He would empty his magazine quickly, then turn around to see who was watching. His target showed holes scattered all over the paper. Some were in the circles. Some were completely outside the circles. But Derek did not seem to care about accuracy. He cared about looking cool. He cared about making noise. He cared about people paying attention to him. Brad shot too, but he was quieter about it. Neither of them were hitting the center of their targets very often. Sarah loaded bullets into her magazine one at a time. Each bullet made a soft click as it slid into place. She loaded 10 bullets total. Then she picked up her pistol and slid the magazine into the grip. It clicked into place with a solid sound. She pulled back the slide and let it go forward. This moved one bullet from the magazine into the chamber. The gun was now ready to fire. Sarah set the gun back down on the bench. Then she pressed a button on the wall. With a quiet hum, her target began to move away from her down the range. She sent it out to 25 yards. That was about 75 feet away. Derek noticed how far Sarah was sending her target. Most beginners kept their targets close. 7 yards was normal for new shooters. 10 yards if they had some practice. 25 yards required real skill. Derek smiled and elbowed Brad. He said something, but his words were covered by the sound of another shooter firing. Brad looked over at Sarah's target moving into the distance and shook his head like he thought she was making a mistake. The range officer was an older man named Frank. He had gray hair and weathered skin from years of being outdoors. Frank had run this range for 30 years. He had seen thousands of people come through the doors. He could tell within a few minutes if someone knew what they were doing or if they were pretending. He watched Sarah from his position behind the firing line. Something about the way she moved caught his attention. She did not rush. She did not fumble with her equipment. Everything she did was smooth and efficient. Her movements had the kind of economy that only came from doing something many, many times. Frank had seen this before, but not often. He leaned against the wall and watched to see what would happen next. Sarah put on her ear protection. The old earmuffs fit perfectly on her head. She had worn them so many times they were shaped to her. She picked up her pistol and stood facing downrange. Her feet were shoulder-width apart. Her left foot was slightly forward. Her knees were bent just a little. She held the gun with both hands. Her grip looked relaxed but firm. She brought the gun up until the sights were level with her eyes. Then she took a breath and let half of it out. The range seemed to get quieter even though the same amount of noise was happening. Sarah's world narrowed down to just her and the target 75 feet away. Her first shot surprised everyone nearby. It was not the sound that surprised them. It was what came after. Without moving her feet, without adjusting her stance, without doing anything that looked like aiming again, Sarah fired 9 more shots. Each shot came about 1 second after the one before it. Bang, 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 bang. Bang, 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 bang. The rhythm was steady like a heartbeat. Her hands barely moved. The gun came back to the same spot after each shot. When the magazine was empty, the slide locked back. Sarah calmly pressed the magazine release. The empty magazine dropped into her hand. She set it on the bench. She set the gun down with the slide still locked open, showing that it was empty and safe. Then she pressed the button to bring her target back. Derek had stopped shooting completely. Brad was staring at lane 7. Other shooters in nearby lanes had also stopped. Everyone wanted to see Sarah's target. The motor hummed as the target came back down the range. It emerged from the distance slowly. Even from far away, people could see something unusual. As the target got closer, the truth became clear. 10 shots, 10 holes, all of them in the center bullseye. The group of holes was smaller than a coffee cup. It was the kind of shooting that professionals worked years to achieve. Sarah unclipped her target from the holder. She looked at it for a moment with a slight frown like she was disappointed. Then she threw it in the trash can and hung up a fresh target. She pressed the button again. This time she sent the target out to 50 yards. That was 150 feet away, half the length of a football field. Derek explained his idea for the competition. It would be simple, he said. Both of them would shoot at standard targets from 25 yards, 10 shots each. Whoever got the highest score would win. He tried to make it sound casual, like it was just something fun to pass the time. But everyone listening could hear the challenge in his voice. Derek suggested they make it interesting. Maybe the loser could buy lunch for everyone at the range. He smiled when he said this, like he was already imagining Sarah paying for everyone's food. Brad stood behind Derek, nodding along. Other shooters had started to gather around. Word was spreading quickly that something was about to happen in lane 7. Sarah listened to all of this without changing her expression. Her face stayed calm. When Derek finished talking, she was quiet for a moment. Then she simply nodded once. "Okay," she said. Her voice was so quiet that people had to lean in to hear her. Derek's smile got bigger. He thought he had her now. He had been shooting since he was 12 years old. He had taken multiple training courses. He owned more than 20 different guns. He had shelves full of trophies from local competitions. Surely he could beat this random woman who just wandered into the range. Brad offered to be the judge and keep score. Frank, the range officer, walked over and said he would make it official. There was something in Frank's eyes, though. A knowing look. Like he had seen this movie before and knew how it ended. They agreed on the rules. Standard scoring with points based on which ring each shot landed in. The closest to center got the most points. They would both shoot from lane 7, so the conditions would be exactly the same. Each person would have 2 minutes to take their 10 shots. That was plenty of time. Derek insisted on going first. He wanted to set a score that would put pressure on Sarah. He wanted her to know what she had to beat. Frank set up a fresh target and sent it down to 25 yards. Derek stepped up to the firing line. He rolled his shoulders and stretched his neck. He was putting on a show for the small crowd that had gathered. He wanted everyone to see how confident he was. Derek loaded his magazine with expensive hollow-point bullets. They cost 3 times as much as regular bullets, but he thought they would help him shoot better. He slid the magazine into his custom pistol. The gun had cost him almost $2,000. It had special sights and a trigger that had been worked on by a gunsmith. Derek took his stance. He spread his feet wide. He bent his knees deep. He looked like he was trying to copy something he had seen in a movie. He raised the pistol and aimed carefully at the target. His tongue stuck out slightly from the corner of his mouth. This was something he did when he was concentrating hard. The first shot felt good. Derek was sure it hit near the center. He took a breath and fired again. Then again. He was taking his time with each shot, aiming carefully, thinking about his breathing, thinking about his trigger pull, thinking about all the techniques he had learned in his classes. After each shot, he would lower the gun slightly, then raise it again to aim. By the time he fired his 10th shot, 1 minute and 30 seconds had passed. He had used most of his time. When his gun was empty, Derek stepped back and pressed the button. The target began its journey back down the track. Derek stood with his arms crossed, looking confident. The target arrived and Brad unclipped it to examine it closely. Frank looked over Brad's shoulder. They counted up the points together. 8 shots had hit in the 9 and 10 rings. Those were the 2 rings closest to center. 2 shots had hit in the 8 ring. One of those was barely inside the line. It was solid shooting. Better than average. Derek had scored 88 points out of a possible 100. The crowd murmured with appreciation. Several people nodded. It was a good score. Respectable. The kind of score that won most casual competitions. Derek grinned and bumped fists with Brad. He stepped aside and gestured toward the firing line. "Your turn," he said to Sarah. He was trying to sound friendly, but his voice had a sharp edge to it. Sarah stepped forward without any drama. She did not stretch. She did not do practice motions. She did not roll her shoulders or crack her knuckles. She simply picked up her worn pistol and loaded a magazine. Her movements were efficient. Every motion had a purpose. Nothing was wasted. She chambered around with a smooth action that barely made a sound. Frank hung a fresh target and sent it to 25 yards. Sarah adjusted her ear protection slightly. Then she raised her pistol and settled into her stance. Something changed in that moment. The nervous woman in the sundress seemed to disappear. In her place was someone completely different. Someone focused, someone competent, someone dangerous. Sarah's stance was different from Derek's. Her feet were closer together. Her knees were only slightly bent. Her upper body was relaxed. She looked comfortable, natural, like this was the most normal thing in the world. She brought the pistol up until it was level with her eyes. She took one breath, let half of it out, and fired. The first shot was followed immediately by the second, then the third. Sarah was shooting much faster than Derek had, but her shooting did not look rushed. It looked controlled, deliberate. Each shot followed the same rhythm. Bang. 1 second. Bang. 1 second. Bang. Her hands returned to the same position after each shot. The recoil seemed to barely affect her. She absorbed it and came right back on target. 10 shots in 15 seconds. That was all it took. When her magazine was empty, Sarah lowered the gun. She ejected the magazine, set the pistol down safely, and pressed the button to retrieve her target. She had finished in a quarter of the time that Derek had used. She had not rushed, but she also had not wasted any time. Derek watched the target coming back with a mixture of curiosity and dread. Part of him still believed he would win, but another part of him was starting to understand that something unusual was happening. Brad had gone very quiet. He was staring at the approaching target like it might bite him. The target emerged from the distance. Even before it reached the firing line, people could see the result. The center of the target looked like it had been attacked by a single large bullet instead of 10 separate ones. As the target got closer, the truth became undeniable. 10 holes. All in the bullseye. All clustered together in a group smaller than a tennis ball. It was machine-like precision, the kind of grouping that seemed impossible for a human to achieve. Brad took the target down with shaking hands. He counted the score even though everyone already knew what it would be. 100 points. Perfect score. Every single shot had hit the 10 ring. The highest possible points. The crowd around lane 7 had grown larger. People from other parts of the range had heard something interesting was happening. They had come to watch. Now they stood in stunned silence looking at Sarah's target. Someone started clapping. Then others joined in. Soon the whole crowd was applauding. Sarah stood quietly accepting the applause with a small nod. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She just waited for the noise to die down. Derek's face had gone through several changes. First shock, then confusion, then something like anger. He stepped forward to look at the target more closely. He seemed to think that looking at it up close would reveal some trick. But there was no trick. Just skill. Pure, undeniable skill. Frank, the range officer, decided it was time to say something. He raised his hand and waited for people to quiet down. When the range was silent except for the ventilation fans, Frank spoke up. He asked Sarah if it would be okay if he told everyone something. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Then she shrugged. It was a small gesture that seemed to say she had expected this moment to come eventually. Frank turned to face the crowd. He had a smile on his weathered face. The kind of smile that said he was about to share a secret that everyone would find interesting. Frank told the crowd they had just witnessed something special. The woman they had been watching, the one some of them had laughed at when she walked in, was not just some lucky beginner. Her name was Sarah Chen. Before she got married, her name had been Sarah Martinez. Some of the older shooters in the crowd suddenly stood up straighter. Their eyes got wide. They recognized that name. Frank continued. He explained that Sarah was a 3-time national champion in precision pistol shooting. She had represented the country in international competitions. Twice. She held several range records that had never been broken. Some of those records had been set more than 5 years ago, and they still stood today. The information hit the crowd like a wave. People started whispering to each other. Those who knew about competitive shooting were explaining to those who did not. Sarah Martinez was a legend in certain circles. She had dominated women's precision shooting for years. She had beaten most men, too. She had been ranked in the top 10 shooters in the entire country regardless of gender. And here she was at their local range in a flower dress shooting a perfect. The afternoon sun climbed higher in the sky outside the Mountain View shooting range. Inside, the temperature stayed cool thanks to the air conditioning, but the atmosphere had completely changed. What started as a hostile environment full of judgment and mockery had transformed into something warm and welcoming. Sarah had become the center of attention, but not in a bad way. People genuinely wanted to learn from her. They wanted to understand how she made shooting look so easy. The competitive tension that had filled the air earlier was gone. Now there was curiosity and respect. Even the background noise seemed different. The constant gunfire had slowed down as more people stopped shooting to listen to Sarah talk. Sarah found herself teaching an impromptu class. About 15 people had gathered around her in lane 7. Some sat on the benches. Others stood leaning against the lane dividers. Everyone was focused on what she had to say. Sarah explained that good shooting was not about strength or expensive equipment. It was about consistency and muscle memory. She talked about how the body needed to learn the correct movements through repetition. Thousands and thousands of repetitions until pulling the trigger became as natural as breathing. She demonstrated her grip, showing how her hands worked together. Her strong hand provided the main control. Her support hand added stability without squeezing too hard. Everything was balanced. Everything worked together. One man asked about how to handle stress during competition. His name was Tom, and he said he shot well during practice but fell apart when people were watching. Sarah nodded like she understood completely. She told him that managing stress was one of the hardest parts of competitive shooting. The key was to develop a routine and stick to it no matter what. Before every shot, she did the same things in the same order. Check her stance. Check her grip. Take a breath. Let half of it out. Focus on the front sight. Press the trigger smoothly. Follow through. Every single time exactly the same way. The routine became like a meditation. It blocked out everything else. The crowd, the pressure, the worry about winning or losing. All that mattered was the next shot. Another person asked about practice methods. How often should someone practice? What should they focus on? How much ammunition did they need to use? Sarah thought about this carefully before answering. She explained that quality mattered more than quantity. Shooting 1,000 rounds with bad technique just made the bad technique permanent. It was better to shoot 50 rounds with perfect focus and correct form. She recommended dry fire practice at home. Dry fire meant practicing without ammunition, just working on the trigger pull and sight alignment. It did not cost anything, and it built the muscle memory that made real shooting better. Sarah said she still did dry fire practice almost every day, even after all her years of experience. Frank, the range officer, had been watching everything from his position near the door. He was impressed with how Sarah handled the crowd. She was a natural teacher. She had patience that not everyone possessed. She could explain complex ideas in simple words. She made people feel comfortable asking questions even if the questions seemed basic. Frank had run this range for 3 decades. He had seen plenty of skilled shooters come through the doors, but most of them were not interested in helping others. They just wanted to show off their abilities. Sarah was different. She seemed to genuinely enjoy helping people improve. Frank thought about this for a moment, then made a decision. He walked over to the group gathered around Sarah. Frank waited for a pause in the conversation. Then he spoke up and asked Sarah if he could have a word with her privately. Sarah excused herself from the group and followed Frank to the front counter. The older man leaned against the counter and looked at Sarah with a thoughtful expression. He said the range hosted competitions throughout the year. Nothing as big as the national events she used to compete in, but they were legitimate competitions. Serious shooters came from all over the state to participate. There was one coming up in 3 weeks. Frank said it would be good practice if she was thinking about getting back into competitive shooting. A way to shake off the rust in a low-pressure environment before jumping into the bigger events. Sarah bit her lower lip as she considered this. She looked uncertain. Part of her was clearly interested, but another part seemed hesitant. She glanced at her watch, and Frank could see her thinking about all her other responsibilities. She had a family now, a daughter who needed her attention, a household to manage. Shooting had been her whole life once, but that was years ago. Things were different now. Frank understood this. He had raised 3 kids of his own. He knew how life changed when you had children. But he also saw something in Sarah's eyes when she shot. A joy, a peace, something she clearly missed. He thought she deserved to have that back, even if just for a few hours at a competition. Before Sarah could answer, Derek appeared beside them. Brad was right behind him. Derek said he had heard what Frank was suggesting. He thought it was a great idea. Sarah should definitely compete. They all wanted to see what she could do in an actual competition setting. Derek admitted he wanted another chance to compete against her. This time with proper respect and realistic expectations about the outcome. Brad nodded enthusiastically. Other people who had been listening started chiming in too. Everyone was encouraging her, telling her she should do it, saying they would come watch. The energy was contagious, and Sarah found herself smiling despite her doubts. Sarah said she would think about it. She could not make any promises. She needed to check with her husband first. Make sure he could watch their daughter that day. Make sure there were no conflicts with family plans. But she admitted she was tempted. The idea of competing again sent a little thrill through her body. She had forgotten how much she missed that feeling. The focus required, the challenge of performing under pressure, the satisfaction of a perfect shot when everything came together exactly right. Frank wrote down the date and time of the competition on a piece of paper. He gave it to Sarah along with his business card. He told her to call if she had any questions, to let him know if she decided to enter. There was no pressure, he said, but he hoped she would come. Sarah looked at the paper and carefully folded it. She put it in her bag along with Frank's card. Then she checked her watch again. It was already past 2 in the afternoon. She had been at the range for more than 5 hours, much longer than she had planned. Her husband was probably wondering where she was. Sarah announced to the group that she needed to leave. She had to get home. There were disappointed sounds from the gathered shooters. Several people asked if she would come back soon. Sarah said she would try. She enjoyed today more than she expected to. It felt good to shoot again. It felt good to talk about shooting with people who understood the passion for it. People lined up to shake Sarah's hand and thank her for the impromptu lesson. The woman from Lane 3 who had been struggling with her shooting gave Sarah a hug. She said Sarah had helped her more in 20 minutes than hours of YouTube videos had. Tom, who had asked about managing stress, said he was going to start working on a pre-shot routine just like Sarah suggested. Even the young guys who had been taking selfies earlier came over to express their appreciation. They said they learned more today than they thought possible. They asked if Sarah had any social media where she posted shooting tips. Sarah smiled and said no. She was not really into that sort of thing. But she would be around. They might see her at the range again. Derek and Brad walked with Sarah toward the exit. Derek carried her gun case for her even though Sarah said she could manage it herself. Derek insisted. It was the least he could do after how he had acted earlier. As they walked, Derek asked Sarah about her background, how she got started in competitive shooting, what it was like to compete at the national level, whether she missed it. Sarah answered his questions as they moved through the range. She told them about growing up on military bases, about her father teaching her to shoot, about entering her first competition when she was nervous and young, about slowly working her way up through the ranks until she was competing against the best shooters in the country. Brad asked why she stopped competing if she was so good. Sarah's expression changed slightly. A shadow passed across her face. She explained that life had happened. She fell in love and got married. Her husband was in the military just like her father had been. That meant moving frequently. Different bases in different states every few years. It was impossible to maintain the training schedule required for elite competition when you were constantly relocating, finding new ranges, new coaches, new training partners. Everything was always starting over. Then their daughter was born 5 years ago and that changed everything again. Being a mother became more important than being a champion. Sarah had no regrets about that decision. Her daughter was the best thing in her life. But she admitted that sometimes she missed the shooting, the competition, the pure challenge of it. 3 weeks passed quickly after that memorable Saturday at the Mountain View shooting range. Sarah had gone home that day and talked to her husband Marcus about the competition. Marcus was a tall man with kind eyes and a patient demeanor. He had been in the Army for 12 years and understood the dedication required for competitive shooting. When Sarah told him about what happened at the range, Marcus smiled. He said he had been wondering when she would find her way back to shooting. He could see how much she missed it even though she never complained. Marcus insisted she should compete. He would take care of their daughter Emma for the day. It would give them some father-daughter time. Emma was 5 years old and full of energy. She loved spending time with her dad. Sarah spent the next 3 weeks preparing. Not intensive training like the old days when she would shoot hundreds of rounds every day. She did not have that kind of time or money anymore, but she went to the range 3 times a week when Emma was at school. She practiced for an hour each time, working on her fundamentals, making sure her muscle memory was still sharp. She also did dry fire practice at home every night after Emma went to bed, standing in the garage with her unloaded pistol, going through her routine over and over. Check stance, check grip, focus on sight alignment, press the trigger smoothly. It felt good to be training again. She had not realized how much she missed this until she started doing it regularly. The word had spread about what happened at the range. People talked. Stories got shared. By the time competition day arrived, there was significant buzz. The Mountain View monthly competition usually drew about 30 shooters. This time, more than 60 people had registered. Many of them came specifically because they heard a former national champion was going to compete. Some were curious. Some were skeptical. Some just wanted to see high-level shooting in person. The parking lot was full by 8 in the morning, even though the competition did not start until 9. People stood around in groups talking, speculating about whether the stories were true. Whether this Sarah Chen was really as good as people claimed. Sarah arrived at 8:30. She parked her old sedan and sat in the car for a moment, collecting her thoughts. She wore proper shooting attire this time, dark pants, a simple polo shirt, comfortable shoes with good grip. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail. She looked at herself in the mirror and took a deep breath. She felt nervous, more nervous than she expected. It had been so long since she competed. What if she had lost her edge? What if the pressure got to her? What if she embarrassed herself in front of all these people? Sarah closed her eyes and reminded herself why she was here. Not to prove anything to anyone else. Just to challenge herself. To see what she was still capable of. That was enough. She got out of the car and grabbed her equipment bag from the trunk. As she walked toward the entrance, she noticed people watching her. Some recognized her from 3 weeks ago. Others were trying to figure out if this normal-looking woman could really be the shooter everyone was talking about. Sarah kept her head down and walked inside. Frank was at the front desk handling registration. When he saw Sarah, his weathered face broke into a huge smile. He said he was glad she came. He had hoped she would, but was not sure. Sarah signed in and received her competitor number. She was shooter number 42. Frank explained the format. There would be preliminary rounds in the morning. The top 8 shooters would advance to the finals in the afternoon. Derek and Brad were already there. They had arrived early to practice and warm up. When they saw Sarah, they came over immediately. Derek looked different than he had 3 weeks ago. Less cocky, more humble. He shook Sarah's hand and said he was excited to compete with her. Not against her, he clarified, with her. He said he had been practicing hard since their last meeting, using the techniques Sarah had shown him. His shooting had improved dramatically. Brad agreed. He said Derek talked about Sarah's advice constantly. It had become kind of annoying, actually. Everyone laughed at that. The tension that had existed before was completely gone. They were just fellow shooters now sharing a common passion. The competition began at 9 o'clock sharp. Frank gathered all the shooters for a safety briefing. He went over the rules, explained the scoring system, reminded everyone about proper range etiquette. Then he announced the shooting order. Shooters would compete in groups of 6. Each group would have 15 minutes to complete their strings of fire. Sarah was in the 7th group along with Derek and 4 other shooters she did not know. She had about an hour before her turn. Sarah found a quiet corner and began her mental preparation. She went through her routine in her mind, visualizing each shot, imagining the feel of the trigger, the sight picture, the recoil, the reset, everything playing out perfectly in her imagination. The early groups began shooting. Sarah watched some of them while she prepared. The skill level varied widely. Some shooters were very good. Others were clearly beginners who had entered just for the experience. One man in the 3rd group shot incredibly well. His name was Marcus Thompson, but everyone called him Mark. He was a former police officer who had been competing for over 20 years. His preliminary score was 93. Very impressive. A young woman in the 4th group also shot well. Her name was Jessica. She was only 19 but had been winning junior competitions since she was 14. She scored 91. Sarah watched them both carefully. They would be tough competition if everyone made it to the finals. Another shooter who stood out was James Rivera. He was in his 50s with gray hair and calm movements. James had competed in the Olympics 15 years ago. He did not win a medal, but making the Olympic team was an achievement in itself. James shot with the kind of smooth efficiency that came from decades of practice. His preliminary score was 92. Sarah made mental notes about all of them, their shooting styles, their strengths, their weaknesses, old habits from her competitive days coming back naturally. She was analyzing the competition without even thinking about it, figuring out what she would need to do to beat them. Finally, it was time for Sarah's group. She walked to lane 7, the same lane where everything had started 3 weeks ago. It felt right to be shooting from this lane again. Sarah unpacked her equipment with practiced efficiency. She loaded her magazines, checked her pistol, put on her safety gear. Around her, the other 5 shooters in her group were doing the same. Derek was in lane 8 right next to her. He gave her a thumbs up. Sarah nodded back. Frank called out that the group had 15 minutes starting now. Sarah pressed the button to send her target downrange. 25 yards. Standard distance. She took her position and waited for her breathing to settle. The noise of 6 shooters firing at once filled the range. Sarah blocked it all out. She focused only on her target, her front sight, her trigger press. She fired her first shot and felt immediately that something was right. The gun felt good in her hands. The recoil was familiar and manageable. She fired 9 more shots in smooth succession, each one feeling better than the last. When she finished, Sarah lowered her gun and ejected the magazine. She felt calm, centered. This was where she belonged. This was what she was meant to do. She retrieved her target and looked at the results. 9 shots in the 10 ring. 1 shot just barely in the 9 ring. 99 points. Just 1 point short of perfect. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Not bad for someone who had been away from competition for 5 years. Derek finished his string and retrieved his target. He had scored 86, much better than his 88 from 3 weeks ago, considering this was a real competition with more pressure. He looked at his target with satisfaction. Then he saw Sarah's score and whistled appreciatively. He said he was not even mad about losing to her anymore. It was like being upset about losing to a professional athlete. There was no shame in it. Sarah thanked him for the kind words. She meant it sincerely. Derek had come a long way from the cocky shooter who had challenged her that first day. He had become someone she respected, someone who took shooting seriously and wanted to improve. That was what the sport needed more of. People who cared about getting better rather than just showing off. The morning rounds continued. By noon, all 60 shooters had completed their preliminary strings. Frank posted the results on a large board near the entrance. People crowded around to see who had made it to the finals. The top 8 scores would advance. Marcus Thompson was in first place with his 93. Sarah was second with her 99. Wait, that did not make sense. Sarah looked at the board more carefully. Then she understood. Mark had shot twice. His second string had been even better, 96 points. That combined score put him ahead. Jessica was third with a combined score from her 2 strings. James was fourth. The rest of the finalists were skilled shooters Sarah did not know. Derek had finished in 13th place. He was disappointed but philosophical about it. He said making the finals would have been nice, but he was happy with how he shot. Sarah stood at the firing line in lane 7 with her worn pistol in hand. The entire range had gone silent. Even the ventilation system seemed quieter than usual. Every eye was focused on her. She needed to score 97 or higher to win. Anything less and James Rivera would take first place. Sarah loaded her magazine with steady hands, 10 bullets sliding into place one at a time, each making that familiar click that she had heard thousands of times before. She slid the magazine into her pistol and felt it lock securely. She pulled the slide back and released it. 1 round chambered and ready. The gun was loaded. Sarah was ready too. She pressed the button and her target began its journey downrange, 25 yards. 75 feet of distance between her and the paper bullseye that would determine everything. Sarah adjusted her ear protection one final time. She rolled her shoulders slightly to release any tension. Then she took her stance. Feet shoulder-width apart, weight balanced evenly, knees slightly bent. Her body remembered exactly what to do even after years away from competition. This was muscle memory built through countless hours of practice, through dedication that most people could not imagine, through a love of the sport that never really went away even when life took her in different directions. Sarah raised her pistol slowly. Her arms extended but not locked. Her elbows had a slight bend that would help absorb recoil. Her grip was firm but not tense. Her right hand provided the primary control. Her left hand wrapped around to give support and stability. Everything was balanced. Everything was working together as one system. Sarah brought the sights up to eye level. The front sight post settled into the rear notch perfectly. She focused on that front sight until everything else became blurry. The target, the background, the people watching. All of it faded away until there was only the sight and her breath and the trigger waiting to be pressed. Sarah took a breath and let half of it out. Her body settled into that perfect stillness that comes right before the shot. Her finger found the trigger. She began to press, slowly, steadily, increasing pressure gradually until the shot surprised her with its break. That was the key. The shot should always surprise you. If you knew exactly when it was coming, you would tense up anticipating the recoil. But if you pressed smoothly and let it surprise you, the shot would be perfect. The gun fired. The recoil pushed back into her hands. Sarah wrote it and brought the sights right back to the same spot, without thinking, without aiming again, just trusting her body to return to the correct position. She pressed the trigger again. Another shot. Another perfect reset. The rhythm was building now. Shot after shot flowing together like music, like poetry. like something beautiful and precise that could only come from years of dedicated practice. Sarah was not thinking anymore. She was just doing, just being, just existing in that perfect moment where everything else disappeared and there was only the shooting. The crowd watching did not matter. The pressure did not matter. The need to win did not matter. There was only this, only now, only the pure challenge of putting bullets exactly where she wanted them to go. 10 shots. That was all she needed. Sarah fired the 10th round and her slide locked back. The magazine was empty. She had completed her string. Sarah lowered the pistol and engaged the safety. She ejected the empty magazine and set the gun down on the bench. Then she pressed the button to retrieve her target. The motor hummed as the target began its return journey. Sarah stood waiting with her hands at her sides. Her face showed no emotion, no anxiety, no hope, no fear. Just calm acceptance of whatever result was about to be revealed. She had done her best. That was all anyone could ask. That was all she could control. The target traveled down the track, getting closer with each passing second. People in the crowd were leaning forward, trying to see, straining their eyes to catch a glimpse of what Sarah had done. Even from a distance, they could see something remarkable. The center of the target looked different than the others, darker, more concentrated. As the target got closer, the truth became clear. 10 holes, all in the bullseye, all clustered together in a group so tight it looked impossible. The kind of grouping that made people question whether they were seeing correctly. Sarah had done it, under maximum pressure, with everything on the line, with dozens of people watching and judging. She had delivered a performance that was nothing short of perfection. Frank unclipped the target with hands that trembled slightly. He was a man who had seen thousands of targets over 30 years. But this one was special. He examined it carefully, counting the score. Every single shot had hit the 10 ring. Dead center, 100 points. Perfect score. Sarah had not just won. She had dominated. She had shown everyone what true mastery looked like. Frank held up the target for the crowd to see. For a moment there was stunned silence. Then the applause began. It started with one person clapping. Then two, then everyone. The sound built until it filled the entire range. People were not just clapping. They were cheering, whistling, shouting their approval and amazement. Sarah accepted the applause with a small smile and a nod of acknowledgement. She was gracious in victory as she had always been. James Rivera was the first to approach her. He extended his hand with genuine respect in his eyes. He said that was some of the finest shooting he had ever witnessed. To perform like that under pressure was the mark of a true champion. Sarah shook his hand and thanked him. She said his 96 was excellent shooting and he should be proud. James smiled and said he was proud, but he also knew when he had been beaten by someone better. There was no shame in that. Only appreciation for getting to witness greatness. Marcus Thompson came next. Then Jessica, then all the other finalists. Each one congratulating Sarah, each one expressing admiration for her skill. The preliminary round shooters joined in too. Derek and Brad pushed through the crowd to reach her. Derek had tears in his eyes. He said watching her shoot was like watching art. It was beautiful. It was inspiring. It made him want to practice harder, to get better, to chase that level of excellence even if he never reached it. Brad agreed enthusiastically. He said this was the best thing he had ever seen at a shooting range. Sarah thanked them both. She told them they had improved tremendously over the past 3 weeks. With continued practice, they would both become excellent shooters. Frank stepped forward with a trophy. It was not large or fancy. Just a simple award with a metal plate that would have Sarah's name engraved on it. But it meant something. It represented a return, a comeback, a proof that skills once earned never truly leave you. They might rust. They might fade slightly. But with the right motivation, they could come roaring back stronger than ever. Sarah accepted the trophy and held it up for everyone to see. The applause began again. People took photos. Some asked for autographs. Sarah obliged everyone patiently. She signed targets and scorecards. She posed for pictures. She answered questions about her technique and her training, and her years away from competition. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah found herself talking to Frank near the front counter. The older man had a thoughtful expression on his face. He said he had a proposition for her. The range needed instructors. People who could teach proper technique, who could help shooters improve safely and effectively. Would Sarah be interested in teaching a class once a week, maybe on Saturday mornings when the range was busy? She could set her own price, make her own schedule. It would not be a full-time job, but it would give her a reason to come to the range regularly, to stay sharp, to stay connected to the sport she clearly loved. Sarah considered this offer carefully. Teaching would mean committing time every week, but it would only be a few hours on Saturday mornings. Emma would be fine with Marcus, or they could work out childcare. The extra money would help too. But more than that, Sarah realized she enjoyed teaching. She liked helping people improve. She liked seeing the light in someone's eyes when they finally understood a concept. When they finally hit the center of the target after struggling. There was satisfaction in that. A different kind of satisfaction than winning competitions, but equally rewarding. Sarah told Frank she would think about it and discuss it with her husband. But she was leaning toward yes, Derek had been listening to this conversation. He spoke up and said he would definitely sign up for Sarah's class if she taught one. Brad agreed immediately. Several other people who were nearby also expressed interest. They said they would love to learn from someone with Sarah's credentials and teaching ability. Frank smiled and told Sarah it seemed she already had students lined up before she even officially agreed. Sarah laughed at that. It felt good to laugh. It felt good to be here. It felt good to be shooting again. She had not realized how much she had been missing until she had it back. At 6, Sarah drove through the familiar streets of her neighborhood with the trophy sitting on the passenger seat beside her. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the road. She felt a sense of peace that had been missing for a long time. The competition had awakened something inside her that she thought was gone forever. It reminded her of who she was beyond being a mother and a wife. She was still Sarah Martinez, the champion shooter. That part of her identity had never really disappeared. It had just been sleeping quietly, waiting for the right moment to wake up again. As Sarah pulled into her driveway, she saw Marcus standing on the front porch. He was holding Emma in his arms. Their daughter's face lit up when she saw her mother's car. Emma wiggled free from her father's grip and ran down the steps. Her little legs moved as fast as they could. Sarah barely had time to get out of the car before Emma crashed into her legs, wrapping her small arms around them. "Mommy, Mommy, you're home," Emma shouted with pure joy. Sarah bent down and scooped her daughter up. She held Emma close and breathed in the sweet scent of her hair. This was what mattered most. This little person who depended on her, who loved her unconditionally, who did not care about trophies or competitions or perfect scores. Marcus walked down from the porch with a knowing smile on his face. He looked at the trophy visible through the car window and his smile grew wider. "So how did it go?" he asked, even though he clearly already knew the answer. Sarah set Emma down and retrieved the trophy from the passenger seat. She held it up for Marcus to see. His response was immediate and enthusiastic. He let out a whoop of celebration and pulled Sarah into a tight hug. "I knew you could do it," he said into her hair. "I never doubted you for a second." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. She had not realized how much she needed his support, how much it meant to have someone believe in her completely and without reservation. Emma wanted to see the trophy too. Sarah knelt down and showed it to her daughter. Emma's eyes went wide with wonder. She reached out to touch the shiny metal with one small finger. "Is this because you won, Mommy?" Emma asked in her high-pitched voice. Sarah nodded and explained that yes, she had competed against other shooters and had done very well. Emma seemed to consider this information seriously. Then she announced that her mommy was the best in the whole world. Sarah laughed and hugged Emma again. She told her daughter that there were many people better than her. But today she had done her best, and that was what counted. Doing your best was always enough. The family went inside together. Marcus wanted to hear all about the competition. Sarah told him everything while she helped prepare dinner. She described the other competitors. The pressure of the final round. The feeling of shooting that perfect string when everything came together. Marcus listened intently, asking questions and celebrating each detail. He was genuinely proud of her accomplishment. He understood what it meant, how hard she had worked, how much courage it took to step back into competition after so many years away. He told Sarah that watching her rediscover this part of herself made him happy. He wanted her to have passions beyond just taking care of the family. She deserved to have something that was hers alone. Over dinner, Sarah brought up Frank's offer to teach classes at the range. She explained what it would involve. A few hours every Saturday morning. She would be paid for her time. It would mean committing to a regular schedule, but it was flexible enough to work around family needs. Marcus did not hesitate. He said she should absolutely do it. Saturday mornings were perfect. He could take Emma to the park, or they could work on projects at home. It would give them special father-daughter time. And Sarah would be doing something she loved, something she was good at, something that would help other people improve their skills. It was a perfect opportunity, and Marcus encouraged her to take it. Emma asked what teaching meant. Sarah explained that teaching was when you helped other people learn how to do something, like how Daddy taught Emma to ride her bicycle, or how Mommy taught her to tie her shoes. Emma thought about this and then asked if Mommy was going to teach people to shoot guns. Sarah confirmed that yes, that was exactly what she would be teaching. Emma seemed satisfied with this answer. She announced that when she was bigger, she wanted to learn to shoot too, just like Mommy. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. They would cross that bridge when they came to it. For now, Emma was too young. But someday, yes, Sarah would teach her daughter everything she knew. She would pass on the skills and the love of the sport, the same way her own father had taught her. After dinner, Sarah called Frank at the range. She told him she had discussed the teaching opportunity with her family, and she wanted to accept. Frank was delighted. He said he would start promoting the classes immediately. They agreed that Sarah would teach on Saturday mornings from 9 to 11. The first class would be in 2 weeks. That would give Frank time to get the word out and give Sarah time to prepare her lessons. They discussed pricing, and Frank suggested a very reasonable rate that would make the classes accessible to most shooters. Sarah agreed. This was not about making money. It was about sharing knowledge, about building a community of skilled and safe shooters, about giving back to a sport that had given her so much. The news spread quickly through the local shooting community. Derek had already posted about the competition on social media. He had written a long post about the woman in the sundress who had taught everyone a valuable lesson. His post included photos from the competition, pictures of Sarah shooting, pictures of her target with the impossibly tight group, pictures of her holding the trophy while surrounded by admirers. The post went viral within the shooting community. People shared it hundreds of times. They added their own comments about never judging by appearances, about respecting skill wherever you find it, about the importance of humility in competitive sports. By the time Frank officially announced Sarah's teaching classes, the response was overwhelming. Within 24 hours, he had 40 people signed up. He had to create a waiting list for additional students. Frank called Sarah to tell her the news. He said he had never seen this kind of response to anything at the range. People were excited. They wanted to learn from a real champion, someone who had competed at the highest levels, someone who clearly knew how to teach based on that impromptu lesson 3 weeks ago. Frank suggested they might need to add a second class to accommodate everyone. Sarah agreed hesitantly. She did not want to commit too much time. But if there was this much interest, she wanted to help as many people as possible. Sarah spent the next 2 weeks preparing for her first official class. She created lesson plans. She organized drills and exercises. She thought carefully about how to structure the 2 hours to maximize learning while keeping things interesting. She remembered her own experiences learning to shoot. What had worked? What had been confusing? What had helped her improve most quickly? She wanted to create a class that would benefit everyone regardless of their current skill level. Beginners would learn solid fundamentals. Intermediate shooters would refine their technique. Advanced shooters would pick up tips and tricks that only came from years of high-level competition. The night before her first class, Sarah felt nervous. It was a different kind of nervousness than competing. When she competed, she only had to worry about her own performance. But teaching meant being responsible for other people's learning. She wanted to do a good job. She wanted her students to improve. She wanted them to feel like their time and money had been well spent. Marcus noticed her anxiety. He reminded her that she was a natural teacher. She had proven that already. The people who signed up were lucky to learn from her. They knew it too. That was why so many had registered. Sarah tried to take comfort in his words. She went to bed early, trying to get a good night's sleep. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear. Sarah woke up before her alarm. She got dressed in comfortable clothes suitable for shooting. She checked her equipment bag to make sure she had everything she needed. Marcus and Emma were still sleeping when she left the house. She drove to the range in the early morning quiet. Her mind was going over the lesson plan, thinking about what she would say, how she would demonstrate techniques, how she would correct mistakes without discouraging students. Frank had told her the students would arrive at 8:45, so she wanted to be there early to set up.